Welcome, Harsha, to 100x Live. Thank you for being part of 100x Live show. So, Harsha Kumar is a partner at Lightspeed, and she loves building teams, product companies, and has been part of some of the most interesting startup organizations. So, she has understood scale and has been chasing growth continuously. So, she was part of the product team at Ola, and she was building Ola Cabs products. Scaled organization from 3,000 rides to a million rides a day. And at Lightspeed, she focuses on SME, consumer, fintech, startup as areas. So thank you, Harsha, for joining us on the 100x Live. Welcome. And let's start with what would be your opening remarks and what are you looking at this current crisis and as a VC, what are you looking around? Lightspeed has a global view and an India view. So what's your view across the globe and in India? What are you seeing with startups and investments in startups?
Thank you so much for that introduction, Sanjay, and thanks everyone for joining. I really appreciate it. Uh, Sanjay, I don't think there's nothing net new to add. There have been a lot of conversations on this subject over the last 2 months, so I won't say anything unique at this point. Uh, but I'll just share some perspective highlights that matter right now. I think from from an investment standpoint, I think that early stage is still fine. I know that most investors in India are continuing to look for interesting companies, and we're okay. I think that the risk that a lot of investors foresee is whether there'll be sufficient growth capital available over the next 2 years, and this is why for most companies that were heading towards growth rounds, um, pretty much all investors have went into this cycle of ensuring that people sort of planned their roadmaps again, ensured enough runway. Wherever top ups are possible, people have done top ups. Wherever funds were able to bridge, they bridged, so that companies can survive this phase. We're hoping that maybe a year or two from now, the growth markets will or growth investments will also be stable. Um, from an early stage perspective, it's business as usual, except for sort of some of the sectors that will obviously see impact during COVID. And the risk there is really nobody knows how long this phase will last. And so while we're seeing impact today, nobody can confidently say that 6 months from now everything will be fine. And that's the issue, which is why for some of the sectors that are seeing high impact due to COVID, my guess is most investors will stay away, uh, at least for the next 6 months to a year. And for others, I think it's business as usual.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the way you are looking across, supporting your existing portfolio. But how are your views on new investment? Are you guys evaluating new deals? Will new
Yeah.
investment continue? Can you just throw some light on that?
Yeah, as I said, absolutely. We continue to see deals coming in, and we continue to evaluate them. There are a large number of sectors are actually fine, so it's not doomsday really. Um, so we're continuing to see deals, and we're continuing to stay optimistic, and we are making investments. Absolutely, there is a difference. Obviously, investments happen over Zoom now instead of in-person meetings,
Mhm.
but that's okay. That's a temporary phase, and it hasn't stopped us from moving forward.
So that's great. So we have a positive note over there from Lightspeed. They are continuing investments in startups. How different it is when you hear across a pitch in live with person and on Zoom? Is there any difference of evaluation? How would you differentiate between both the experiences?
I think different people work differently. A big part of an early stage pitch is really the founder, how he thinks, and what his vision is. And there's so much signal in body language, so obviously that's missed. And so the only thing you have to rely on is what you're hearing, because you can't sense the way you can sense in person.
Sure.
And I think that it just puts added pressure on founders to um, prep a little bit more, because unfortunately, and actually, more pressure on investors as well to dig more, because some of that signal that's really in body language or in just your chemistry when you're in person with somebody, all of that is lost. And so you have to make up for it somehow. And I think both sides of the table have to put in effort to fill that gap, because obviously the risk for us is that we miss out on a great team and a great company. um, and we wouldn't want to do that, right? So I think maybe you'll see longer investment cycles, or sorry, not investment cycles, longer diligence processes, multiple meetings. It might get annoying. There might be too many questions. The pressure on founders will be more. They will have to prep more, I guess. Um, I think things like that would happen. Multiple partners would see. I think this is something that I heard from another early stage investor recently, where they said, where earlier it was okay for one partner to take a decision, they're sort of being more consensus driven these days, where they want more partners involved, because you might be missing out on signals in this new world. And so you can imagine what that does for a founder, right? Like, obviously, as a founder, you want to close this fundraise process quickly. You want to get back to business, and so that might not be very pleasant. I feel aside from that, I don't see any other impact, right? I think it's just more work on both sides of the table.
Mhm.
Maybe slightly longer, diligence phase, uh, a few more meetings, and a few more digging. But yeah, not more pleasant than before for either side, but I think it's needed given the
Gotcha.
gap.
So it's not just founders who are handicapped. It's investors equally which are handicapped.
Yeah,
Both the sides are learning the new way of trying to build a partnership and a relationship in terms
yeah,
of investing or agreeing to take the partnership forward. So
yeah.
let's see, on the Zoom side you have a pitch, and you are listening across, and founder is talking about the market size, the founding team, the solution IP, deal terms, various stuff which typically you would see across standard in any pitch deck. What slide would excite you the most? Is it market size, founding team, the IP, being a product person, deal terms? So what is the exciting thing which you would look at, right? And what would excite you the most?
For me personally, and I think that every investor has a different style. Um, for me, it's a lot about just the founder's faith, right? I think that I tend to derive a lot of conviction from the founder's conviction.
Hmm.
Um, and I have a tendency to push. I push with tough questions, and I may not come across as very friendly in the first meeting.
Hmm.
But for me, that's where I get a signal, right? Where I can sense the conviction in someone's tone, in what they're reading from the market, their signals. Um, I feel like every investor will do his work later on. You have to get him to a point first where he wants to do his work, and I
Sure.
think that's only possible. That's a function of just the founder's own conviction. Um, so I tend to look for that.
So if you had to rate across as a priority, what would come first? Market size, founding team, the solution IP, the business model strength. How would you rate across in a priority? What is more important for you if you have to
The
go one
team.
by one? Team.
I would say the team, and then I think what matters a lot to me, or at least I've seen this in the past, is the founder market fit. Is he the right founder for this market that he's going after?
Mhm.
And when I say that, I know I'm using the term a little loosely, but I don't mean it in the sense that, oh, you're building a fintech company, so do you have a fintech background? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, I'll give you an example, right? Early days of Ola was, it's a consumer company and it's a transaction business. So one would argue, oh, the founder should have great operating chops because it's an ops heavy business. So that's founder market fit. But another angle to founder market fit is that this is a market that has to be created. It is not a market that exists. So the founder has to be a force of nature, right? Like he has a grit that's unusual to go ahead and crack this. I think that's strong founder market fit, right? In the SaaS scenario, you know, if you're solving, let's say, a customer support issue, you can be a great techie and maybe you have past experience managing customer support at a large company, but that is not that alone is not founder market fit for me. In that case, founder market fit would be the founder just has great sales ability, right? He can sell anything. I think that's unusual. So I feel for me, when I say team, I actually what I mean is the team in the context of the business that they're building, and do I see a founder market fit?
Gotcha. And if you have to share Lightspeed investment thesis in terms of what sectors you guys look at, what kind of check sizes you write into, any
Yeah,
specific geography or regions you want to invest, and which are the no's, saying that we will not invest in particular space kind of stuff.
yeah,
So you can just highlight on a broad way,
yeah,
what's the Lightspeed investment thesis for audience?
yeah. So we invest across sectors. There's no sector we would say no to. The only criteria for us is technology first businesses. So we don't invest in non-tech. So a
Hmm.
pure offline brand, for instance, is not within our purview. Um, and in terms of stages, we do across stages. Actually, we do seed all the way to growth. Um, and we do growth not just in our portfolio companies, we also do growth in other companies. So we have a global multi-billion dollar growth vehicle that we use for growth investments. In India, we're a team of 6 partners. We're a top-heavy org. We don't have a huge army. It's all partners take their own decisions, and obviously we have an investment committee which comprises of the 6 partners. Um, and the same partners sort of look at deals across stages, right? So seed, early stage, as well as growth. And while we would use different investment vehicles in terms of check sizes, seed is typically sub 2 million. Series A is, I guess, uh, we'll figure out what the range is in the post-COVID world, but I guess 3 to 7, and then growth stages, of course, depending on whether it's B, C, D, it could be anything. So we invest across stages.
Got you. So, how is the typical process at Lightspeed? Like, how does one pitch, and what is the timeline? How quickly
Yeah,
a deal gets done? Any process insights which you can share across?
yeah. I think it is important that we're flexible depending on what the particular deal needs. So we've in the past closed deals within 2 to 3 days,
Oh.
and sometimes also some deals would have taken 2 months. On average, I would say our timeline would be maybe 3 weeks max.
Hmm.
Where from the first meeting to taking a decision. If you like a company, typically in Lightspeed, we have a two partner deal team. So there is a lead partner who would take the board seat, and then there is a supporting partner who is continuously involved. And
Hmm.
the idea is that we typically need 2 partners thumping the table before a deal goes to IC and gets approved. Um, we'll take the first meeting. If the first partner likes the company, sees something interesting, he'll loop in another partner. The two will then go back and do their work. Um, and if they're interested and the work reveals positive signals, we'll take it to IC. Post IC, I guess the team would have more questions. If there are more questions, we'll do some more work on it, and then we'll take a decision. And typically, uh, we've generally been able to get to a decision in about 3 weeks.
Gotcha. So we have a question coming up. Minimum ticket size of investment, and how can somebody contact Lightspeed? So what's the best way to get in touch with Lightspeed?
Yeah, so we have multiple ways. Of course, if you have any of our email addresses, just drop us a note. But we also have our portal where you can submit your deck. So it's called submit.lsip.com. That's, of course, that goes through its own process where someone sort of sits and goes through all of the applications and all of the decks. So you can expect some delay before you hear back on that one. If you go through somebody and you're connected directly to someone on the team and I think this is important to know. At Lightspeed, we have partners, VPs, associates, senior associates. We're a team of, I think, 11 investment professionals, but we're a flat organization. I've often seen that people only want to talk to a partner, or maybe only want to talk to the MD. You should know that, like, that's not how Lightspeed works. We're a flat organization, and everybody in the company has a say. In fact, even in our IC meetings, associates sit in as well. Um, and so in that sense, if you get through to anybody at Lightspeed, it'll be uh, you know I think a net positive meeting for you, and I hope that you have a good experience with whoever it is that you talk to on the team, and they'll follow the process that's required to make sure the next steps are taken. Uh, so the assumption that you need to talk to the partner shouldn't be there. You can talk to anybody. And then we also have submit.lsip.com. You can submit your deck there, but expect delays in responses on that one because it has to go through a process. In terms of ticket size, as I said, seed is sub 2 million, series A can be in the range of 3 to 7, and then growth stage checks can be as large as a couple of 100 million as well.
Gotcha. We've got one more question from Ayushi Patwari. What are your views on social entrepreneurship, and VCs have low confidence on the sector? What is your personal view in terms of the space?
I very, very honestly, I don't have an opinion on it because Lightspeed has not made any social impact investments, and so I wouldn't have much of a point of view on that. Sorry.
Sure. Any views on Swadeshi product, the Make in India movement? Any inputs on that side of does VC and Lightspeed look at specific to Make in India?
Sort of no specific thesis on Make in India. As I said, we're only committed to making tech investments, and we do invest specifically in companies that are building in India or building for India. So you could be building a product that is for the market in the US, but your team is sitting out of India. We would still look at it, and but other than that, there is no criteria.
Sure. How does Lightspeed work with its portfolio company? What kind of support besides capital a startup founder can
Yeah.
expect across from Lightspeed kind of stuff? So, any insights on your portfolio handholding?
We've Lightspeed. I think we've all six partners at Lightspeed have past experience in building companies. We've either in the past life been entrepreneurs or have scaled other companies in leadership roles. So for instance, I was heading product at Ola Cabs before I moved it on to investing. And everybody um, has had some experience to have empathy around what it takes to build a company, and we take a lot of pride in it. It's including companies that people across levels in the fund have past operating experience. I think that allows us to um, provide patient capital.
Mm.
that understands what their journey is like. But more specifically, we do what generally is expected out of an investor, of course, regular board meetings or monthly meetings, contributing to AOPs, making relevant connections where required. But we also have a strong operating team in place. So we have a hiring team in place that contributes and helps our portfolio companies with executive hiring. Our finance team can help with, cash flow, P&L planning. So pretty much all of the company building support we do provide. And then partners directly, of course, get involved with strategic thinking as well as making relevant connections to help founders wherever required.
Awesome. I mean, it makes a huge difference when, personally, I believe when you take money, if your VC is an entrepreneur VC or an operator VC, I think it makes a huge difference because they understand the pains of building a company. They have built a company, so they know the process rather than just a financial investor which is living in a spreadsheet. So
Yeah,
I think Lightspeed has a great, DNA in that sense, which is going to help a lot of the startups which they fund across. Uh, it, from your personal, perspective as a partner at Lightspeed, are you a passive investor or an active? What is your belief saying that okay, I discover the bright founders and let them do what it is, or you are an active like oh, okay, let's talk every day and kind of keep me
yeah.
posted. What's your personal view on your portfolio management and the investments which you have done?
Yeah, at least my personal view is that, I mean, you do what the founder needs, right? So there are founders that prefer being left alone, and they're good at it. They just run with things, and that's okay. And you give them their space, right? Um, and that's your value add. Your value add is the space you're giving. That's all they need. And then there are founders who would probably turn around and say, "Hey, I'm young, less experienced. Work more closely with me." And then that's what you do. And then there are founders who won't say anything, and you have to read between the lines and do what they need. But I feel like in the end, if the line of communication is open and it's honest and direct, then you'll find that middle ground. You'll know when to be involved, when not to be involved, and the founder will tell you when he doesn't want you to be involved, or will include you when he does, and vice versa, right? Like as an investor, you can say that, hey, this is critical, and I think I should be more involved, and I would like to be, or say that, hey, this is something you should be driving on your own, not right for me to take this decision, or hey, can I connect you to the right person who can help you, right? But I feel that this is why I also said I think chemistry is important. I think once you have that in place, you can always sort of play around with the level of involvement depending on the situation. And I think those are the best kind of relationships, right? Um, I will say this though, I want to be friends with my portfolio companies as far as possible. I think that I would rather be direct and have straightforward conversations than cushion things. And I wouldn't want founders to also wrap things up for me before they tell me something. I think it should be, um, startups are supposed to execute fast, and so I would rather not have my founders waste time on packaging things for me.
Sure, I understand. So it's great to be honest, but many times while many of the VCs and investors, it becomes you take that critic viewpoint, but typically founders have different opinions, and finally you'll have to take a call how to move forward in a particular situation. So any can you share any success stories of your portfolio, your journey with entrepreneurs? I'm sure you would have passed across through multiple cycles, because entrepreneurship is all going ups and downs kind of stuff. So any stories which you can share across within your portfolio on journey with entrepreneurs?
um, I don't know specifically what kind of story you're looking for.
No, in
Can you
terms
throw
of
more?
startup founders, how the engagement started, be it across on hiring or any help which you would have done across on the product side of it, and which helped companies grew across. So what kind of journey as an partner which within your portfolio you would have gone through in terms of learning kind?
Uh, I don't think I'm in the place to say this. I think folks should talk to our portfolio founders
Okay.
and hear from them
Smarter way of
uh, where we've contributed. I don't think it's our place to talk about them.
Sure. That's a smarter way to push around, saying that let those founders be your spokesperson. We have a question from Dev Sina. What would be one advice to founders who are testing MVP tech product? Having this your such a great background, what would be your advice?
I've written about this before, but I would say when you're very early stages, when you've launched an MVP, there's not much signal in data. So you can't say that, hey, I have tracking in place and I'm seeing a spike on this number or that number, and so you know that the product is working. Your only choice, your only choice is to literally go talk to all your customers, as many customers as possible. Um, that's where the real signal is. Data at that point is so little that it doesn't really provide any insight, and over reliance on it can only take you down the wrong path. So I think that's one advice I will give, especially at early stage and in an MVP stage. Talk to your customers more often. Like I know founders. I remember like when we invested in OK Credit, for instance, all three founders used to spend a good number of hours in the early days just on the phone with their customers. I think each founder could confidently claim talking to, at least like 50, 100 customers a week. Um, and like split by three of them, it's like 300 people a week. That's a lot of time if you're spending quality time with your customers. So I don't think anything else matters more.
Sure. That brings me to the next question. You just published a blog about building multilingual products for India. What's your view? Can you just share in nutshell about the blog?
Yeah,
What's your view on building multilingual products?
I was very fascinated when I spoke to people who've done this well, um, and I realized I mentioned this in my blog as well. I think that if you are designing a product for the global market, right? That it is not a product just for India, it's for the world. All the learnings that came up when you're designing for Bharat, I think would apply directly to global or solutions as well. And the insight really for me was this is probably why when you figure out how to sell something to an Indian customer, or when you figure out how to build something for the diverse Indian audience, the world opens up to you, right? You can easily then go out and start scaling this product to other markets. Um, I think that for me was very useful insight because I guess I no longer think of companies as building just for India. Um, the realization I had is that if you figure this out, you can scale anywhere.
Gotcha. So, what's your belief? Do you believe in India or Bharat? What is the market which is appealing to you?
Both, I would say. I think there's not enough done yet in India for both markets. I think there are opportunities at both ends. Obviously, many more in Bharat because a lot of the one would argue that a lot of products from the West would apply for India, but not necessarily for Bharat. For example, there's not a strong jobs portal yet for most of Bharat. Platforms like Naukri so on apply well to India, but not necessarily for other markets. Um, One can argue that there's not a strong social media platform for the rest of Bharat, although Facebook is quickly getting there. Um, but I think the gaps for Bharat are far more than they are for India. Having said that, I think even within India, there's a lot of opportunity because I feel like people are looking for this is a segment where earning is growing a lot faster, and spend is actually not growing as fast. And that tells you something. As you see sort of the gap between earnings and spend, and you see how much saving is happening in this country, especially in like tier one India, I think that says a lot. And right there, I feel that there is still a lot of potential in India, in India as well, and not just in Bharat.
Sure. So, from that perspective, what are the trends which you are seeing, which Indian entrepreneurs should look upon, saying that, these are the investment trends. I mean, we have seen across the VCs have an herd mentality going after a sector like fintech, travel tech, and, we have seen that, a lot of deals get funded
Yeah,
in the same space. So,
yeah.
what's your outlook as an investment trend which you are seeing across right now, which entrepreneurs can learn from?
So, Lightspeed has traditionally not been an investor in trends. We've traditionally, I think like one would argue, but for example, when we invested in Oyo, like that wasn't a model that was trendy at that time, right?
Yeah.
It, um, I don't think that like same I would argue the same thing with for Udan, right? Like a B2B marketplace wasn't a trend really. But I think what we look for is fundamentals, and I think I'll only stress on that, which is um, maybe I'll double click a little bit, and I have different points of view for different sectors. But I think like let's say I double click on consumer. I think that when you're building for the Indian consumer, there are a couple of things you have to keep in mind. One is and then again, specifically for Bharat, for example, as an example, and this is just an example of how we think. We will have frameworks like this for every market. But if you think about building for Bharat, like a couple of things you should keep in mind, for example, is one is, you know, nobody is yet proven that you can extract money from this user. And so if you're building a model where your cost of acquisition is high, you're setting yourself up for failure because your CAC to LTV ratios will never make sense. So figuring out low cost distribution in the segment is critical compared to India. In India, if you acquire users that are at 500, 1000, 1500 rupees, you can be assured that depending on the category you're playing in, you can make money from this user. But that's not true for Bharat. So you want to think a little bit about what your distribution is, and I would double click on that. I would want to know how the founder is thinking about his go to market, his distribution, right? Similarly, if you think about Bharat, this is a trust deficit society. So a large percentage of users consume the internet but still don't spend online because they just don't trust that they can spend on something that they've not seen. They can't see who they're spending on or who they're
Sure.
giving their money to. And so a lot of Indians are wary about spending online. And so that's an area that I would like to double click on. How do you earn trust, right? And there are so many interesting models around this. For example, for someone like Byju's, like a lot of sales happen on the phone. You're not spending, you know, on a website directly. You're giving your money to somebody you can talk to, or maybe even somebody who's visited you at your home. You can see this person, you can grab his collar. If you think about Misho, for instance, it's a great distribution. It is designed for trust. You're buying from somebody you know, right? So the propensity to spend is a lot higher. So I love models that are solving for trust in India, right? Um, I feel like the other is I guess one would argue is the obvious one that if you're building for Bharat, scale is critical. So I feel like a lot of vertical solutions don't make sense for this segment, right? You want to build horizontal solutions as far as possible. You want to go after multiple categories. This is the same lens that I would apply for SME or MSME rather. Is that again, it's a large market, but nobody's managed to figure out monetization. And I would want to see horizontal plays more than vertical plays because it just increases your odds, right? This is also why OK Credit was very exciting for me, was because it was organic distribution. They probably spent on marketing for 6 months last year. They don't even spend on it today, and largely because um, their product just grew virally. And like this is a company that could grow at 100% month on month without spending a penny. So I think it's the frameworks that we look for rather than sectors or hot areas. If companies fit into these frameworks, or at least the founder has thought through them. And I know that at early stage you don't have all the answers, and that's fine. But I think that knowing that the founder is thinking through these things is important, and you might not have an answer to it, but even having the awareness to know that this is an area at some point that you would want to focus on is important. And so as I talk to the founders, I think as I would say this for the rest of the team, we don't get married to sectors or themes or hot areas. I think we're only married to technology, and then we apply a more practical lens to say, what do you want to see depending on the user that you're going after, because this user has a certain characteristics.
Sure. But still, I mean, as a VC and then as an early stage investor, where you are doing early stage investing, you need an horizon saying that, okay, these are the sectors which are looking very promising, right? And if you had to pick, let's say, three sectors, saying that where you believe it's going to be successful, it's promising for future, and the future success, these are the emerging sectors which founders should be looking at. Any specific areas, three areas which you want to point out, saying that these are the sectors which you believe are going to grow exponentially? Like, for example, EV, like a lot of things are happening in the EV space,
Yeah.
plant food, plant meat kind of. So these are new emerging areas which were not existing before.
Yeah.
So any three emerging sectors which you believe, founders should be looking at?
I don't like doing this, but I guess I'll share a little bit. I think I feel like India is so underpenetrated. There's something happening everywhere. It's a very exciting market, but I think edtech remains interesting forever,
Mhm.
and there's so many gaps in India still.
Sure,
If you think about, India one, you would argue that this is a market where you would build extracurricular activities for kids. You would go, maybe coding classes for kids. Maybe you would go after, premium tutoring for kids,
sure,
um, robotics. I think there is options, but I don't know how big that market would be. But I think on the Bharat side, like training in English is so important. Math training in general remains exciting. I think edtech is like just underpenetrated. There's still
true,
more to do.
sure,
Um, I think that fintech, a lot of people argue that इंडिया में क्या बनेगा, गवर्नमेंट आरबीआई सब बना देता है, एनपीसीआई सब कर लेगा. Reality is there is still opportunity. The reality is that B2B payments is still not solved. The reality is that insurance is deeply underpenetrated. I think roughly about 3% of Indian households have any kind of insurance. That's far lower than the global average. Um, there is still no strong digital savings product, and savings is second nature for Indians. And there is still opportunity there, right? So I think it's deeply underpenetrated. SME, again, like if you think about SME in India, in Southeast Asia, uh, in like Middle East, I think like you can include multiple markets in this, but if you look at it, there are no localized solutions. So the solutions that you have available, as an example, you have solutions like Ariba or Oracle or so on. Like these are very expensive products for most businesses in these regions. Um, and I would argue that if you can find more economical solutions, there's a big market for these solutions, right? So I think there isn't enough SME software in India, and I think that this region is ripe for it. And I personally feel that influencers will just grow and grow, and it'll become a way for marketing. And maybe I'm putting my foot in the mouth, and maybe like 3 years from now I feel differently, but at least today I do. And I don't think that there are enough products out there that allow influencers to monetize.
sure,
Um, and so, or allow brands to think about how to reach the right influencers, right? Or brands or agencies or anybody. Pretty much everyone ends up concentrating towards celebrities when the reality is that, it's the micro influencers where you get most of the traction, and you don't know how to pick one. There is no pricing standardization. So there are a lot of gaps even in that market, right? So if you get me started on specific areas where there are gaps, there are so many, and the list can go on and on. This is why I sort of prefer having filters rather than have hot areas, because there's just so
It was very
many.
interesting. I mean, for me also, it was quite educative in terms of understanding, how you look at the various gaps and opportunities in India and Bharat kind of stuff. And, the way you explained the SMB market. And I think the way 100x, we did a survey of India sentiment outlook survey. And when we were doing both qualitative and quantitative analysis, what we saw across was one of the spaces was SMB market in India itself was now emerging across in terms of automation, because people were at home and they wanted to
Yeah.
do everything online. So you are so right in that sense. So you got one question which is coming up in terms of how the lockdown has it reduced the number of investment proposal, or is it wait and watch approach kind of stuff? What's your view here?
I think we covered that before. No, it's not wait and watch. We're still investing. We're still taking meetings online and making investments online. So it's business as usual.
So Kishan is asking across on your views on B2B, B2C e-commerce startups in near future.
It's a broad question. It's hard to comment on that.
Sure, sure. We can move around. So on the closing note, I've taken almost 40 plus minutes of yours. We spilled over on that side. On the closing note, any views about 100x model, business model, the first check where we write across. This is my standard question for every interview what I do across on the show. What's your view on 100x, and what we should be doing more in terms of getting VCs like you deals? And we are a discovery platform. What should we be doing more?
Um, I guess I obviously love your model. We spoke about this earlier. Um, I think the stage at which you come in, and as well as the check size, makes a lot of sense. It basically helps founders sort of get through, cold start problems, and you can just hit the ground running at the very least. And then depending on how you execute, you can achieve a lot more with it. But at least you can hit the ground running. You're not trapped in a corner, which itself is huge. Um, I feel this is something that came up in our survey, because we reached out to a number of founders and asked them sort of, what do you want to, where do you need help, what do you want to see, and more generally, right? Because we wanted to, I think the same question that you're asking, so we wanted to know what we can do better. Um, and two things that came up, which was very interesting, was one is the biggest value add that people saw was in getting connected to people who've been there, done that. So either these are founders or operators who've scaled companies, who are basically in some sense ahead of them in their cycle, because a lot of founders felt that it was easy for them to connect to their own peers, but it is harder to connect to founders who are ahead of you in their journey, and or even operators, right, who are in fairly senior roles. And so if you could open doors to that, that's super useful. And I think second, which came up, which was very interesting, was the how should you be making that connection,
Oh,
and the how for that connection, both for VCs and operators. The feedback that founders gave us was they would love to connect at informal events,
nice.
because that helps people open up, versus think of the engagement as very transactional. They didn't want transactional relationships. They wanted real relationships, because that's when the discussion is open and transparent and fair, and um, that's when new ideas happen, right? So they wanted more informal environments where they could connect to both investors as well as practitioners. Um, so maybe, yeah, maybe those two for you as well.
Sure. Thank you. I got some fan moments from startup founders thanking you for the insights what you have given across. And thank you so much, Harsha, for coming on 100x Live. It was pleasure hosting you, and
Sure,
look forward possibly in some time soon in the post-COVID era with lots of startup success story at your end. Thank
absolutely.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.